Think about the last time someone you loved was in pain and there was nothing you could do about it. Not nothing easy, nothing. You had every resource, every intention, every desire in the world to fix it, and it didn't matter. You just had to stand there and watch. That feeling doesn't have a great name. Helplessness is too clinical. Heartbreak is too romantic. It's something older than language. The specific agony of love without power. There's one image in the entire history of comic books that captures that feeling so completely that people who have never once picked up a comic stop when they see it. They don't know the characters, they don't know the story, they don't need to. They just know what the face looks like. The image is Crisis on Infinite Earths number 7, published in October of 1985. Superman holding the body of Supergirl crying. And if you think you've heard everything about this cover, I promise you, you haven't heard it like this. George Perez drew that cover when he was 31 years old. He was working on the most ambitious comic book event DC had ever attempted, a story designed to restructure the entire DC universe, to collapse decades of continuity into something new. And he had a specific problem. The cover needed to tell you that something genuinely irreversible had happened, not the hero is in danger, not a battle was lost. Irreversible, the kind of thing you do not come back from. Superman could lift a planet, he could outrun light. He had survived things that would destroy a god. And on the cover, none of that matters. None of it is visible. There's no cape billowing in triumph. There's no clenched jaw of determination. There's just a man holding someone he loved who is gone. And he's falling apart. Superman's want is simple and total. He wants Kara to be alive. His obstacle is the first one he's ever faced that his power can't touch. And what he discovers, what the cover captures in a single frozen second, is that being the strongest person in the world means absolutely nothing when love walks out the door. Here's where it gets interesting. Perez didn't just draw a sad picture, he made specific, deliberate compositional choices. And those choices are the reason this image works on people who have never read a single comic in their lives. He placed Superman's face in the center of the frame, slightly below eye level. When you look at the cover, your eyes drop to meet his. You look down at him, the most powerful being in the universe. And for one moment, you are the one looking down. He gave Superman's arms a specific position, one under Kara's knees, one cradling her back. The way you'd carry a sleeping child, not a hero transporting a fallen soldier, a father carrying a daughter to bed. And he gave Superman tears, not a single stoic tear tracking down a composed face, not a trembling lip bravely held. I'm talking about full open weeping, the face completely undone. Every one of these choices was a decision, and every one of them does the same thing. They strip power away until only love is left. Now, let me give you a little history lesson. In 1499, Michelangelo finished the Pieta. If you've never seen it, it's a marble sculpture of the Virgin Mary holding the body of Jesus Christ after the crucifixion. It lives in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It's widely considered one of the greatest works of art ever made, and there's a detail that bothered people immediately. Mary looks young, too young, younger than her son, a mother holding a grown man's body, and she looks like a teenager. Michelangelo was asked about this directly. His answer, her purity made her ageless. She had never been touched by the things that wear people down. And because of that, she could hold this moment, the worst moment of all time, without being destroyed by it. Perez built the same composition, not in marble, in four-color ink. Except he flipped the theological logic entirely. Superman isn't ageless in that moment. He isn't untouched. He is completely undone. The Pieta says grief can leave you unmarked. This cover says the opposite, and somehow, in the same breath, both images are true. The most famous image of grief in the history of Western art, hiding on a spinner rack in 1985. Same composition 486 years later, making the exact opposite argument. And it works for the same reason the Pieta works, because the composition doesn't ask you to understand the story, it asks you to recognize the feeling. So I was 7 years old the first time I saw this cover. I don't know where, spinner rack, somebody's stack, doesn't matter. What I know is that I stopped, completely stopped, because I could not process what I was looking at. Superman was crying. That wasn't possible. That wasn't allowed. Nothing had ever made me feel that way about a piece of art before. I didn't even have a word for what art was yet. I just knew that something on a comic book cover had done something to me that I didn't understand, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And here's my admission. The first time I really looked at this cover, and I mean really looked at it, I'd already seen it, hundreds of times. I knew the story, I knew Supergirl died, I knew it was important, and I still wasn't prepared for what I felt when I finally slowed down and just sat with it. Because here's what I got wrong for years. I thought this cover was about Supergirl. It's not. It's about Superman. It's about what happens to the person who survives. And that landed differently than I expected because I had spent years of thinking this image as a monument to her death. And it's actually a portrait of his grief. There's a difference. Monuments face outward, portraits face inward. And this cover is facing inward. This cover was published in October of 1985. Like I said, Ronald Reagan was president. Top Gun was a year away. The cultural definition of masculine strength was at a very specific, very particular peak. Stoic, physical, unbreakable. The strong man didn't flinch, and DC Comics put a man weeping on the cover of their biggest event of the decade, not as a villain's triumph, not as a moment of weakness to be overcome, as the emotional climax, as the image they chose to lead with. By the way, in 2007, DC held a poll to determine the single greatest cover in their entire history. This is what won. But here's the thing that nobody talks about when they bring that up. Inside the issue, on the actual page, her last words to Superman aren't goodbye. They aren't I'm sorry. They aren't even about the mission. She tells him, please don't cry. And then in her final breath, she tells him she loves him for what he is, for how good he is. And then Perez draws the cover. Superman couldn't do it. He couldn't hold it together. The most powerful being in the universe asks one small thing by one of the people that he loved the most in the entire world with her final breath, and he couldn't do it. Not because he was weak, because some things are bigger than strength. That's what the cover is. It's the moment Superman lost an argument to grief. And then here's the third thing. This cover has been homaged and replicated more than almost any other image in comics history. Batman has held bodies this way, Captain America has, characters from entirely different universes. But here's what most artists who return to this composition do. They keep the tears because they understand, even if they couldn't explain it, that without the tears, it's just a superhero holding someone. The tears are the whole argument. Do you feel the pattern? Imagine you're at a funeral. Someone stands up to give a eulogy and they don't cry. They're composed, professional. They say all the right things. You respect it, you leave. Now imagine someone stands up and halfway through the first sentence, they lose it completely. They can barely finish. And the entire room goes with them. Which eulogy do you remember? That's what this cover is. It's the eulogy that couldn't hold it together. And that's why 40 years later, you still remember exactly where you were the first time you really saw it. That's why this is my favorite cover of all time. Most people think this cover is iconic because Supergirl died. But Supergirl died on the inside of the comic. She died in the story. What happened on the cover is different. What happened on the cover is that Superman, the character built specifically to represent the fantasy of total power, the ultimate answer to human helplessness, discovered that power has a limit, and that limit is love and loss. The cover doesn't say Supergirl is dead. The cover says even the strongest person you can imagine breaks when they lose someone they love. That's not a superhero story. That's a human story wearing a cape. If you've never read Crisis on Infinite Earths, issue number 7 is worth picking up just for the scene inside that the cover is illustrating. Writer Marv Wolfman gave Superman a moment of grief on the page that the cover makes visual. They belonged together. They earned each other. But you don't need to read a single comic to understand that cover. You just need to have loved someone you couldn't save. And if you've done that, and I'm sure you have because everyone has, then that cover was always already about you.